All right, welcome everybody to our Saturday sermon for June. Somehow it is freaking June in the year 2024. That happened fast, huh?
Sure did.
Oh man. All right, so we are psyched to be here this month. It's been a minute again. We like we're getting there with this, right? Pretty soon we'll get back to some sort of consistent space, but uh we're really excited this month to have Lindsay Mumma, rhymes with Puma. I was making sure that I got that right.
Yep.
Lindsay and her husband are the ministers that are running the Burrow Ministry down in North Carolina. And they're brand spanking new to Fifth Element and still ramping up. What we are super excited to see where it ends up going, because from the conversations we've had about what you guys are doing down there.
Excitement abounds.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like a trip to North Carolina is going to be in my future, in the near future, which will be very, very so. Lindsay is here to talk to us about breath work, and I am gonna let her take it away. All right. So Lindsay, you go ahead.
Thank you so much, Jess. Appreciate it. So I am thrilled to talk about the diaphragm at any point in time that I can talk about the diaphragm, because I think it is one of the most fascinating muscles. It's a smooth muscle, but it has structure and function that make it sometimes act a little bit like a skeletal muscle. So your skeletal muscles are the ones that you can use to move you around intentionally, and your smooth muscles are what line your organs. And so those ones act involuntarily. But what's really, really cool about the diaphragm is how it is involuntarily moving all of the time in order for us to be able to breathe and continue surviving. But it is able to be voluntarily controlled. And depending on how much time and effort you want to put into training that muscle, you can actually voluntarily control it pretty much all day, every day, with the exception of when you're asleep. If you want to, like if you wanted to dedicate your life to mastering your diaphragm, you could only take conscious breaths all day, every day. So a lot of emphasis and attention has been placed on the diaphragm or on breath work in general, but less on the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is actually, I believe, God's gift to us to facilitate whatever amount of healing we need or want to do, because we have this beautiful dome-shaped muscle that sits up inside of our rib cage. And with every single breath we take, and the breath is the most powerful thing that animates us. This is what welcomes us into the world. The first thing that we do upon being birthed, regardless of circumstance or location, where you were born or how it happened, whether you come out the sunroof or you were born vaginally, whether you're in a hospital or you're at home or you're in your car on the way to the birth center or you're at a birth center or you're in a field next to a stream with a baby deer next to you, doesn't matter. However it is that you come out, the first thing that you do is take a breath. And that is the difference. It's kind of like our dragonfly moment, where I didn't know this until very recently, like in adulthood, and maybe I knew it when I was a child and I just forgot that I learned it, but dragonflies live an entire life underwater. And then they transform in water. They grab onto a reed and they climb up the reed, and their back opens up to find that they actually have wings and they can now fly. And then they live a life flying about, which is where we see them. But we have the same sort of experience in our initiation into life. We live in a fluid environment for the first 9 months of our creation. And in that fluid environment, we're getting all of our oxygenated blood given to us through our umbilical cord. And so our diaphragm is not really responsible for breathing. If you see ultrasound images of babies, they practice breathing when they're in utero, but they don't actually have to breathe the way that we breathe externally. And so part of the birthing process that's so beautiful is that the contractions of the vaginal wall will actually compress the lungs in order to get the amniotic fluid out of a baby's lungs to help prime them for when they come out, they will take their first breath. And so when they take their first breath, a baby's position and posture is that they're They've got their hands all tucked in. And if you can think of the fetal position, it's called the fetal position because that is how babies come out. And that's the posture that they're in. Their rib cage is kind of arched upward and their thumbs are tucked into their fists and their hands are tucked into their sides. And they go, and they take a big breath up into their chest. And it's kind of a startling thing initially, even in the most peaceful births. It's a complete change in the physiology of how we get oxygen. And so oxygen is what comes into us, and then we use that to fuel our cells so that they can go and give us nutrients throughout our entire body. And so when we take that very first breath, the diaphragm is very newly active, and a baby's position and posture is such that their rib cage is elevated until they kind of get some repetitions of their diaphragm actually lowering. So we see a transformation within the first year of life. I really love, so I'm a chiropractor by profession outside of my ministry work. And I see pregnant women and postpartum women and babies all of the time. And I really love working with those populations because they're changing so drastically. And one of the things that happens in the very first year of life is the astronomical change in the function of the diaphragm. So the diaphragm has three functions. Main functions. It functions in breath, which it does from the moment we take our first breath until our last breath when we leave this earth. It functions in posture, which is completely developed within the first year of life. And then it functions as a sphincter, which it actually has that function in utero to some degree. But that is what keeps your stomach from going above your esophagus. So all of this is perfectly orchestrated by our creator. We have the ability to actually unfold in perfect synchronicity so that all the things and all the pieces and parts of us can work well together. So when we take our very first breath, it's more of a chest breath. It's coming up into our neck and shoulders. And this, for the rest of our lives, will remain a stress breath. And the reason for this is because whenever we're under stress, stress is physiologically a threat. If we are in a state of perception of safety and we believe ourselves to be safe, according to the polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges, if we believe ourselves to be safe, then our physiology will respond differently than if we believe ourselves to be truly under threat. But stress physiologically is recognized as a threat. And so if we get into stressful situations, we tend to do more of this upward chest breathing that we initially did when we first came into the world, when we first took our first breath. And that is because it is a little bit of a shocked breath. What I tell patients all the time is that breath is very similar to one that you would have if you thought there was a tiger that was crouched in a bush nearby that was going to attack you. And so if your breathing is upward into your chest all of the time, so humans in general take 12 to 16 breaths per minute. And if they are continuing to breathe up into their chest on repeat, then they will have this stress response physiologically, because our physiology is wired that new things and we're scared and newborn baby into the world, I have to take this cautious, short, shallow chest breath. Whereas when we're calm and relaxed and we're well taken care of and we have all of our needs met, then we can take these nice, deep, slow, relaxing breaths. And those breaths won't go up into our chest at all. So ideally, those 12 to 16 breaths a minute, which is a little higher than necessary, we really can function extremely well taking 5 breaths per minute. If we're taking 12 to 16 breaths a minute though, and those are all up here, we actually will physiologically stress ourselves out more. When we're stressed out, our most important thing is survival in the moment. There's none of our reserves and none of our physiology is actually going toward survival long-term, because if we're actually truly under threat, then the most important thing is surviving this moment. And so there is this really powerful aspect of breathing that brings us back to the present moment. And in your present moment, are you truly connected to what's happening around you? and what is happening within your body and within the universe that is contained within you? Or are you completely unconscious of the breath and therefore kind of just at the whims of what's going on around you? When we take slow, intentional breaths and we actually allow our diaphragm to lower itself, then we can physiologically send hormones and oxygenated blood to all of our tissues without having to have the immediate stress response that we'll have if we have short, shallow chest breaths. So in that first year of life, as a baby is developing, the first 6 weeks, they're continuing to kind of take those short, shallow chest breaths. After they get to about 12 weeks, so when they're 3 months old, it'll be kind of the classic idea that you have in your head of what a baby in tummy time looks like, where they actually have enough of an angle of their arm to be able to hold them in an upright position. So when they're laying down, they can start to lift their head. Lifting their head is way less about neck strength and actually more about diaphragm strength. So around 3 months old is when we start to see the diaphragm begin its function and posture. So the diaphragm in utero is not used for posture at all because the baby's floating in this fluid environment and it doesn't have to hold itself upright. And when a human baby is born, we don't have upright posture right away. We're not giraffes, although we do have the same number of neck bones. Cervical vertebrae in a giraffe, 7. Cervical vertebrae in a human, also 7. I think that's absolutely fascinating information. So God created us all in different shapes and sizes, and some of us have really long necks and some of us have really short necks, but we've all got 7 vertebrae. There are plenty of other mammals who don't have 7 vertebrae. Most of them don't, in fact, but giraffes, 7. So when baby giraffes come out, they're a little bit wobbly, but they're standing upright. When humans come out, we're lots of wobbly and we are not holding ourselves upright, but we are also the only mammals who get to full upright position with our diaphragm on top of our pelvic floor. Most other mammals have some sort of forward lean, if not all the way into a quadruped position. And so we have evolved to have our diaphragm on top of our pelvic floor, which means that we need to have synchronous activity between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, because if we don't, then neither of those two really important structures will function optimally. So when we begin to lift our upper part of our torso up, we're lifting our head, neck, and upper chest up when we're 3 months old, that's the first time that the diaphragm has really been under load. About 6 weeks later, at around 4.5 months old, babies can intentionally cross the midline of their body. And what that means for our movement and our development is that we can now differentiate between one side of the body and the other. Before, when we're 0 to 4 weeks and 4 days, that's not, or 4 months and 4 days, that's an exaggeration, but before we get to 4.5 months, we can only do things intentionally with both sides moving exactly the same. And we can't take one side of our body to the other side of our body with intention. It might happen accidentally, but around 4.5 months, that's when a child can grasp something to actually be able to bring it to their mouth. And what's happening within the core is that the diaphragm is starting to be able to have more stabilization in order for us to be able to move our limbs away from center. So whenever I'm talking about the center of the body, I'm talking about the torso. So from the neck to the bottom of the pelvis, that's the torso, which is actually the core of our body. So whenever people think about the core, they just kind of think about a 6-pack muscles right in the middle of the abdomen, but the core is so much more than that. And the core and its health in general are supplied by the health and the movement and the strength and the mobility and the agility and the movement of the diaphragm. So as we get to 4.5 months, we start to see some differentiation, which means that the diaphragm is able to stabilize us enough that we can reach out to the side and we can actually start to see some more complex movement sort of unfolding. By the time a baby gets to 6 months, they can roll onto their side with proficiency, and they need to be able to do this on both sides, because if they don't, then the compression of our joints being like weighed upon as we roll to our side actually helps us to form our joints. And so all of the things that we've introduced to like make life better for our babies actually makes life worse for them later on down the road. If we place babies into bumbo seats and we are sitting them up before they can sit. That actually prevents their diaphragm from being able to stabilize their core in order for their spinal curves to be formed appropriately. We have the ability to actually create perfect skeletal structures if we don't interfere with what it is that a child's development is wanting to do in its unfolding. So if we continue to watch a baby develop through the first year of life, by the time they're 7.5 months, we'll see them get into what's called a low oblique sit, where they can actually kind of hoist themselves up, not hoist, but they can lift themselves up onto their elbow and be in like slightly elevated supported position. That's now their diaphragm is no longer even touching the ground at all. And they're able to support their torso being in this slightly elevated but angled position. So this is kind of what we see in other mammals, where they have an angle of the diaphragm being on top of the pelvic floor. When the baby gets to about 10 months old, we can actually see them into an upright seated position. So there's this idea that babies sit at 6 months. I don't really know where that idea came from, but it's not very accurate. And most babies do not sit at 6 months in a completely functional capacity. In general, we expect to see babies sitting somewhere between 7.5 and 10 months old. And so as a baby is moving through this, what they're getting is more and more uprighting of their diaphragm. And the uprighting of their diaphragm is actually what lets their diaphragm then sit atop of all of the rest of their abdominal organs. So all of the organs that are in your, like kind of within your abdominal cavity, within what you would typically refer to as your stomach, which includes your stomach, but it also includes your liver and your spleen and your gallbladder and your large intestine and your small intestine and your uterus or your prostate, depending upon your sex. And it is all of your abdominal organs can now be basically massaged by your diaphragm. So the diaphragm's function in posture is helping to hold us upright. So it helps us to get to that upright position in the first year of life, and then helps to stabilize us as we go from being in a seated position to being in a kneeling position to then being in a fully upright position where a baby is now standing as a toddler and is ready to go. Sometime between 10 and 14 months is usually when we see first steps, usually closer to that year mark, that we'll see a baby get to an upright position. So that entire year of development, mostly what's happening within the core system is that the diaphragm is getting more and more load and more activity. And in so doing is actually creating a stable abdominal wall and creating a stable base from which to be able to support all movement for the rest of that child's life. So once we get to this upright position where the diaphragm is now sitting in the rib cage and it is now in a perpendicular to the ground position atop of the pelvic floor, the diaphragm lowering will actually cause the rest of the organs in the abdominal cavity to move. And this movement provides such vital nutrition as well as mobility to organs that actually require movement. So most people don't think of their organs within their abdominal cavity as moving, but we know about peristalsis, which peristalsis is that kind of wave-like movement of getting our food to go through our digestive system in order for it to come out. Movement is how we extract nutrients out of the food that we've taken. So the food that we take in goes down through our throat through peristalsis. Once it goes from like into our stomach, it then reaches the acid that's in there, which starts to break down the food. We've already got digestive enzymes that our brain has released, and it's a whole beautifully orchestrated process. But the movement of our gastrointestinal system is actually crucial for our ability to digest food. Well, if we're taking super high chest breaths and we're breathing as if we're stressed out, our brain doesn't actually care about our ability to digest whatever meal that we just ate. If we instead are taking slower breaths, now our brain is wired for, oh, okay, I must be in a safe environment. This means that I can digest my food. I'm less concerned about getting blood flow to go to my calf muscles and my glute muscles so that I can run away from whatever tiger it is that's crouching in a bush. And I'm more concerned with being able to take care of myself and do some cellular repair and be able to regenerate new cells and be able to get rid of cells that I don't need any longer. So all of those processes kind of get put on hold if we're in an upregulated kind of very stressful situation. And our breath is what's dictating that. But it's not just because of the way we're breathing, it's also because of the physical mechanics of what the diaphragm is doing. So if we're taking short, shallow chest breaths, our diaphragm is barely lowering at all. So it's not giving any of that organ motility and offering the actual movement of our organs to them in order to facilitate more of that digestive movement that we see in more of a parasympathetic state. So most of us learned in some high school biology class or some equivalent that there's fight or flight or rest and digest, and that the parasympathetic is either happening or the sympathetic system is happening. But the polyvagal theory, which I referenced a little bit ago, actually hypothesizes that we can either be immobilized, mobilized, or socialized, and that those are kind of the functions of what our autonomic nervous system is going to respond to. So if we're super upregulated and we're really scared, we're going to do less of the rest and digest and cellular repair. We also don't have as much input of kind of calming the vagus nerve down. So the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, and that's what the polyvagal theory is named for. Poly meaning many, and vagal in reference to the vagus nerve. So kind of the 3 layers of the vagus nerve is what Dr. Porges has introduced, and we're able to access our ability to take one of our cranial nerves that impacts things all the way from our brain to our most distal parts, the parts furthest away from our center, through its regulation. So when we take a deep breath, and specifically when we're breathing through the nose, because if you're breathing through your mouth and that air is not being warmed, it's now whatever temperature or humidity that is in the room that you're in or in the space that you're in outside, it's not filtered at all. So if we take a breath through the nose, that actually opens up our sinus cavities. They're called cavities because they're supposed to be space. A lot of people have a lot of things within their sinus cavities, making them no longer spacious. When we bring breath into those areas, that actually helps to improve the flow of air through our face. This also creates the structure of our face in the first year of life. So for kids who are sucking on a pacifier all day and who don't have the ability for their tongue to mold the top of the roof of their mouth, and who don't have great orofacial health, they also then tend to, when the pacifier comes out, be mouth breathing. And that mouth breathing just kind of continues the pattern of not having open sinus cavities, which literally forms how wide our face is, how open our face is, how much our eyes can see because of the visibility regarding our facial structures not being in the way. It also allows us to have healthier open airways. So the way that we breathe truly is like an ongoing dose of beautiful medicine for us to be able to take in our own medicine. If we're breathing through our nose and we take a nice expansive breath. So this is where things get really exciting, because most people are aware that breathing is crucial. Most people have heard that breath work is beneficial, and they've probably done something. If they've ended up at a Fifth Element Free Church sermon, they have probably done some amount of breath work at some point in their lives, because they're on some sort of growth trajectory that is asking of them to better their physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental self. So if they're here, they've done breath work of some sort. But most people are not utilizing the diaphragm to its full healing capacity, which is really what I was excited to talk about today, because when we fully respect the diaphragm and its parameters of all the things that it can offer, and we tap into trusting that our body is truly working in our favor, and that it was truly designed with the most perfect design in mind. Because when our diaphragm lowers, and it causes all of our organs to move, which stimulates digestion, which improves our ability to do rest and repair, because we've taken this breath that lets our brain know that we're in a safe environment and that everything is going to be okay. When we actually honor that, we can't be holding tension anywhere else within our abdomen. So a lot of people are walking around, they've got boulders for traps. These things are just on and tight all day, every day. As a chiropractor, I could work on people's neck and shoulders all day, every day, and make zero difference if I don't help them change the way that they breathe. Because if they do this 12 to 16 times a minute, they're just going to keep creating tension up here. But if instead they actually allow their diaphragm to lower, when they inhale, which will increase the pressure within their abdominal cavity, which therefore means that their abdomen is going to expand. Now we've gotten into a completely different rabbit hole because most people are not super excited about their abdomen looking any bigger. Pregnancy is the only time when any woman that I know is like, hey, check out how much my stomach is sticking out now. Most of the time, people are staying away from expanding their abdomen. They want to have their abdomen be as small as possible. I think that there's probably some amount of us that would prefer that we take up less space. I don't really like that. I prefer that on inhale, our entire abdominal wall actually expands, which means that we're expanding into our back as well. So most people who have tension in their upper traps also have tension in their paraspinal muscles. So those are the muscles that line either side of your back. Those muscles in particular will try and hold you upright if your diaphragm isn't doing an adequate job of being able to do that. And it's not that the diaphragm is kind of slacking on its job. It's that we've intentionally said, hey, diaphragm, please don't come any lower by holding our stomachs in. So if you draw your belly button to your spine and you walk around like that all day, you'll prevent your diaphragm from doing its full job. Your diaphragm can no longer take the full breath that it was intended to take, meaning that you won't have the ability of your diaphragm to lower fully, which will stimulate digestion, which will stimulate healing and cellular turnover in an appropriate way. And you won't have the ability to have your diaphragm compress the contents of your abdominal cavity, which will give feedback to the pelvic floor. So I actually wrote a book about the pelvic floor. It's called Your Pelvic Floor Sucks, because most people's sucks. And also because the only thing that people know about the pelvic floor is a Kegel exercise, which is just sucking the pelvic floor up and in. It's the same kind of idea as sucking the belly button to the spine. We're preventing these tissues from moving to their fullest capacity and doing their full jobs. So the diaphragm being able to lower all of the way will actually create better health. But if we're pulling our abdomen in, then our diaphragm can't lower quite as much. So my invitation here is actually just to place your hands. Sometimes people put their hands on their sides. Sometimes people like to put a hand on their low belly, a hand on their back. But when we breathe, and I'm talking all of the time, not just at the end of a yoga session, not just when we're intentionally doing breath work, but all of the time, we need to have relaxation within our upper abdomen. Most people are walking around with a lot of tension there. If you have tension in some place in your body, you'll create tension in another place in your body because it's the closed kinematic system. This system is designed to work synchronously with itself so that you can walk about and do the best work for the highest good everywhere you go. But if you're holding tension, that prevents you from being able to fully express all of the beautiful gifts that are contained within this wonderful universe that you live in. So when the diaphragm lowers, the abdomen expands all the way into the back. So if we can just go ahead and take 3 deep breaths together, hand on the low belly, hand on the back, or hands on your side, so that you can actually feel the expansion into all of those tissues. That's what I'd like to do right now. So in whatever way feels comfortable for you, this actually will be easier if you lie down. It is harder when you're upright because the diaphragm is actually functioning in its postural function while you're upright, and it gets to take a little bit of a rest on posture whenever you're lying down. But let's go ahead, in through the nose, out through the nose. We're going to take a nice deep, deep, deep inhale into 360 degrees of your abdomen, okay? In and out. And in and out. And in and out. And then if we just sit for a moment, you completely change the energy of the space around you because you completely change the energy of the space within you whenever you actually slow your breath. So when you take a breath on purpose, there's already energetically a change that happens. But when you take a breath that is actually in honor of the function of your diaphragm and the function of the tissues that are supporting you all day, every day, there's not just an energetic shift, which is what breath work has become kind of known for. And I really love that people are doing a lot of breath work, but when you do it in a way that is supportive of your body and not detracting from the way that your body was actually designed to move, it's really healing, because now you have just stimulated better digestion. So oftentimes, I would not be surprised if you did that. You took 3 full deep breaths, and when you did it, you got some belly gurgling sounds because you stimulate digestion. Another fun fact is that the sound of belly gurgling is called borborygmus in Latin. That's a thing that you learn in school. It's just a lot of Latin. You do it in law as well as anatomy. And so borborygmus is the name of belly gurgles in Latin. And so we often will, as we introduce this type of breathing to our patients, we'll hear borborygmus and they're like, oh, sorry, I just ate breakfast, or I didn't eat this morning, or whatever it is. No, I fully expected to hear your stomach start to make some noise because we've stimulated digestion simply by paying attention to the way that you're utilizing your diaphragm. So now we've given oxygenated blood to your most distal tissues. So the tips of your fingers and the tips of your toes just got more blood because you took those 3 breaths. Your digestion just got the message that you are in a safe place enough that you can actually digest whatever food that you've eaten recently. And even if you're fasting, still the act of extracting nutrients is an ongoing process, and getting rid of waste products. This is how you can actually stimulate your own detoxification, because if you're taking short, shallow breaths, your brain is in such a stressed out scenario that it doesn't realize that it's actually okay to get rid of your waste products. It's actually okay to extract nutrients, because the only thing you're focused on is not dying in this moment. But our life is so much more than just not dying every moment. Our life is actually about extracting the nutrients out of every experience that we can possibly have. And we allow ourselves to do that when we actually take a full, deep breath all of the time. Don't just reserve the breath for when you're in Shavasana. Don't just reserve the breath for when someone says, okay, let's take a deep breath together. No, actually, all of the time, invite your own self to utilize the tools that you have available to you to strengthen the smooth muscle that is your diaphragm and actually allow it to get to new ranges of motion. Your diaphragm is meant to lower completely. If your ribs are flared up, and I call them rib boobs, if they're sticking out, then your diaphragm has not been able to lower fully. And one of the easiest ways, and this is actually just a really fun and playful thing, I'm gonna have to move my camera a little bit here, is to pinch over your rib cage, like the lower ribs. Just pinch the skin and the fat and the fascia and everything that you can get your hands on, pinch it, and then breathe into it. So let's do another one of those 3 deep breaths, but I want you to pinch yourself this time, okay? Just make sure you're not dreaming. Nice, good grip on any part of your lower rib cage. You can go all the way around anywhere you want. Pinch, and then deep breath in and out. And you can wiggle your hands a little bit. That'll make it extra fun. And then breathe in again and out and wiggle. And then for this 3rd breath, drop your hands and just breathe in again and out. And it was easier to take a really deep breath because your diaphragm just got a little bit of fascial mobilization. You have all of the tools that you need to be the healthiest person that you can be inside of your own body. Now, every once in a while, it's a really great idea to get someone else on your team. But you really are a completely sovereign being who has every single tool that you need for optimal expression of health contained within you. It doesn't hurt to get a team on board, and it doesn't, I absolutely get adjusted myself. I get acupuncture. I do lots of things to keep myself healthy because I live in an environment that is coated in toxins and has all sorts of things coming at me all of the time. So what I choose to do to take care of myself reflects the environment that I live in, but my own body is the safest environment that I could ever possibly exist in. And so this perfect vessel has many tools available to you and is designed to function perfectly. So when things aren't functioning perfectly, that means that we do need to get a little bit of extra help because it's meant to work. This whole system, from our very first breath until the last breath that we take, is actually designed to continuously be self-healing and self-regulating, and to be its own kind of warehouse of all of the nutrients that we could need, and to be able to facilitate moving those nutrients in different places. And when we access utilizing our diaphragm appropriately and fully with respect to this most glorious and amazing muscle that exists within us and dictates so much of the physiology happening within our body, we can unlock so many new things for our own expression of health. So with that, I would like to thank you all for joining me here for this Saturday sermon, for my very first Saturday sermon. One of the things that we'll be incorporating into everything that we do at the Burrow Ministry is introducing breathing intentionally. And so being able to access that full strength of the diaphragm in all of its functions and in its full capacity is just part of everything that I do. And therefore, it is part of everything that we're bringing to the Burrow Ministry. So thank you so much. It was really wonderful to spend a little Saturday morning with you.
Thank you, Lindsay. I had no freaking idea. I was like chuckling, like there's a few things that you said that I was like, I had no idea that there was like a postural component to the
Yep. The
diaphragm.
central tendon of the diaphragm attaches into the lower thoracic spine. And so it stabilizes the spine. And the diaphragm is actually one of the only muscles that can actually decompress lumbar discs.
Really?
Okay.
Okay.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I love to nerd out about this type of stuff. So like you're in very good company right now because I eat this stuff up. I mean, and Nicole, I mean, I don't know if she's can speak to this because she's a singer also. Like I sang as a kid, and it was in choruses and competitive choirs and things like that. And so I'm not the diaphragm isn't foreign to me.
Right.
But also like no, I never had any idea that it had that many like physiological like connections to stuff. That's just nuts.
Yeah.
Something
We're
we should
perfectly
know.
designed beings. And the thing, like when you learn, so one of my teenage patients, she was really trying to understand how she could utilize like the pressurization that we talk about whenever we're in like introducing exercise. So once you have the diaphragm figured out just for breathing, then you can actually utilize it to stabilize. You can utilize it for movement. You can utilize it as like part of your movement strategy. And that's what's missing, I think, from a lot of kind of workout and fitness things in general, is just that there's not really a strategy behind it. And so when I was describing it to her, she was like, oh, like a chorus breath. And I was like, yes, that's perfect, because, but you have to not think that this is just for chorus. This is just for singing. Like, no, that's just an expression of you using your voice. Well, you use your voice all day and you use your diaphragm all day. So being able to access it the same way that you would to hit a high note is a really beautiful gift. So like that's singers and anyone who rides horses usually has an easier time like learning to understand kind of the mechanics of the diaphragm when we're working with them, like as a chiropractor when I'm working with my patients hands-on, because they've had to utilize it just in their experiences.
That's Jordan's wheelhouse. Jordan rides horses. So all right. This is awesome. This is really good information. Do you do like workshops or anything like?
Yeah. So we're so like at my practice, we just, have patient care. And then I teach continuing education for chiropractors. And so I tend to introduce some of those things. All of the things that I learned about the diaphragm, I basically learned from DNS, which is dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. And so I'm a certified DNS practitioner. And so I went to Prague to study and kind of got to hang out with all of the most brilliant minds in manual therapy, have like walked the halls of the Prague school. And it's like just kind of baked into everything that we do. I've done workshops on this, and it's just, everyone thinks that they know the diaphragm. Everyone thinks that they know breathing, because it's kind of watered down, but really like the nuance and the depth of the diaphragm and its capacity for healing and its capacity for just improving life overall is pretty astronomical.
It's like not insignificant. I love the connections that you made to polyvagal theory too. I've been like really diving into polyvagal theory lately.
Stephen Porges and I have exchanged emails. We're like friends. That's not true. But several years ago, he and I exchanged emails and I felt very special.
I was gonna say, I have the cards. I got the book.
Yeah.
He didn't write the
Okay,
book.
I read textbooks, but like the polyvagal theory, I still haven't finished it because it is so dense.
But yeah,
It's so
it's a
serious.
lot. And I'm like, look, I know the cards are here somewhere because I was literally just looking at them, but like, that was a game changer.
Mhm.
Game changer. Like just learning about that because, you're experiencing what is it, the ladder metaphor that they use
Yeah.
all the time, right? Like you're
Yep.
experiencing it all the time, but the way my brain works, it's like I need to read it and see it and have it explained to me logically. And then it's like I can reverse engineer, like, oh, that's why I'm feeling
That's what I
it
feel.
like
Yeah.
that, right? But it's cool to know that, that diaphragm can help
Mhm.
with, with that type of regulation. I mean, breathing, obviously, but like, that intentional breathing. And I'm a yogi also. So I'm curious, that was the question. Okay. Um, they're constantly telling you in yoga that you're supposed to kind of like pull in your gut,
Mhm.
breathe like at the same time, right? So would you use, yeah, okay. That's what I was wondering is like, do you think
So
that that's
that's why we have yoga classes, because that's not true. It's just, it's a completely backward way of stabilizing the spine. And the idea is that you're creating stability by having this tension, but all you're doing is creating tension. And you're disrupting the flow of
I've
actually like how
never,
the diaphragm stabilizes.
yeah, like 20 plus years I've been doing yoga, and I will
Mhm.
tell you that that's like the one thing that has never felt right to me because they'll
Mhm.
constant, I mean, depends, right? Not all teachers do it, but some of them will cue you, suck it. They have different ways
Yeah,
of
like
it's
hug your rib cage in. And
pulling
what
it
they're
up the
trying to do is
button,
get you to
right?
activate your transversus abdominis. And so the transversus abdominis is the horizontal muscle that goes across the abdominal wall. And it's a really powerful muscle, but it actually functions eccentrically as well as concentrically. And so there was a study that Paul Hodges did, and it kind of like broke into everything. So it was in the late 90s, and Hodges is a researcher out of Australia, and he's done a ton of work on how the pelvic floor and the diaphragm function, like anything abdominal wall health. Paul Hodges has done research on it, and he's like very well known in manual therapy. So he did this study, and he discovered that in workers, like they kind of, had similar groups of workers who had low back pain did not activate transversus abdominis first. Workers who didn't have low back pain activated transversus abdominis first whenever someone was going to hand them a load and they were going to receive it. And so that was the end of the study. The follow-up, but that like made it into PT school. It made it into chiropractic colleges. It made it into fitness training. And so everything that you have heard is like transversus abdominis coming in because that's going to strengthen the low back. Because in people who didn't have low back pain, they activated their transversus abdominis. And that was the first thing they did as they were ready to accept a load. Unfortunately, the follow-up study that they did, they trained those workers how to activate their transversus abdominis first, like draw your belly button to your spine, create activity here. Those workers still had low back pain. So we found the problem, but we didn't find the right solution. And the reason why is because the transversus abdominis is one part of the core. And there's
Right.
been such a focus on it literally since the late 1990s that it's broken into absolutely everything. So any fitness class that you've taken, anything that you've ever like had someone cueing you, they have definitely heard that you're supposed to have transversus abdominis activity. The like breaking down the original study, activity within a muscle doesn't tell you the direction of the activity. So like the muscle could be shortening or it could be lengthening. Either one of those is possible. So the bicep getting shorter, the bicep getting longer, those are completely different actions of the muscle doing different things, but it's the same muscle and there's activity in the muscle. So all we knew is that transversus abdominis had activity first. But that's because in a system that works, the transversus abdominis is the first thing to activate. In a system that doesn't work, you can make the transversus abdominis activate first, but that doesn't change a broken system. So if you actually work on getting the diaphragm to create stabilization, the transversus abdominis will be the first thing that comes online. And so it just like, it's infiltrated into everything. And so many people know breath work and they've heard these things over and over again, but they've heard a lot of, okay, yeah, deep diaphragmatic inhale, but then on exhale, draw your belly button to your spine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just, it's
Yeah.
everywhere.
I feel like there's so much of that in Western medicine in general, where like
Mm-hmm.
some snippet just makes it into the mainstream and then nobody ever fucking follows up on it.
Yeah. But I mean, they did follow up on it. It just didn't break in.
Right, right, right.
Like
Yeah.
they did the follow-up study and we still are like, oh yeah, you have to have tight abs in order to have a strong back. If you have tight abs, you have a tight back.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
Is that what you want to feel? That's
Right.
not what I want to feel.
No, it's totally, yeah. All right. So I'm so glad that I asked that because I was like, when you were talking about it earlier, I was like, oh, I got to remember. And then of course it went
Yeah,
right.
no, you did remember. Great job. Also, that was a whole rabbit hole. So thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, no worries. Listen, we're all
I had
about
a
the
sermon and then I followed it up with a TED Talk.
we genuinely should probably like start calling our Saturday sermons like, weekly rabbit hole sessions because
Weekly rabbit
that's
holes.
basically what we do around here, right?
And
We
you
are,
know that's part of the name of the borough, right? Because just rabbit hole after rabbit hole all
so
the
what's
time.
really funny about this synchronistically is that I have been dealing with a groundhog issue in my garden for the past like 2 weeks. So we're just going to leave it at that right now because like,
Best of luck with your groundhog
and
situation.
literally every single time I've used the phrase like, oh, gone down that rabbit hole in my head, I'm just like, pun intended, right? Because that's like literally
Unintended.
my life right now is me searching out little burrow holes and
Oh,
you know, I'm 1,000% Bill Murray and Caddyshack right now. Like
that's
it's
you right now. Mm.
life. It is my life because I put way too much work into my garden to let that little thing win. I'm telling you right now, not going to happen.
I will pray for you and I will also pray for that groundhog.
Yeah, please do because it's anybody's game right now. Man versus nature doesn't usually turn out
I
well.
mean, if you're Bill Murray, it's not going to end well for you.
No. No. It's, I mean, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. But I'm stubborn, so it's gonna happen.
Okay,
All
good
right,
luck.
Lindsay, thank you so much. It was
Thank
great,
you.
absolutely wonderful to listen to you. I'm gonna stop our video now.